I tried to use AI to pick a character for me to play in Smash Bros. Now, this isn't what's that? Sorry about that, folks. Allergy season comes a little bit early where I live. Now, this video is not some stupid clickbaity, oh, I asked ChatGPT what the best Smash character was and then laughed at its lack of knowledge of the current meta. I plan to use ChatGPT to tell me what secondary is best to cover my main character's weaknesses using statistics and expert opinions. And if I can, I want it to code me a program so that I can play around with the numbers and then make all that information public. So, how am I going to go about solving this? Well, to delve into my thought process, we need to talk about tier lists and matchup charts. I think nowadays most people know what a tier list is, but in terms of a fighting game, a tier list is a list or a chart in which the author ranks out each character and how good they think they are at the highest level of play. A matchup chart, on the other hand, tells you how much of an advantage the author thinks each character has when going against every other character. So in order to understand these concepts a little bit more deeply before we dive into it, I think it might be beneficial to look at the tier list and the matchup chart for a fighting game that I think everybody watching this might be familiar with. That's right, I'm talking about the world famous fighting game, Rock, paper, scissors. A tier list might look like this. Assuming you don't know which character your opponent is going to pick, your chances of winning with any given character aren't any better than your chances of winning with any other given character, so no character is placed above or below any other character in the chart. But what if you were to know what your opponent was going to pick? If we know which character our opponent will pick, we now know that there's a character we can pick that will give us a definite advantage. For example, if we know that our opponent is going to pick scissors, we know that there is a 100% chance that we'll win if we choose rock, there is a 0% chance that we will win if we choose paper, and there's a 50% chance that we will win if we pick scissors because we'll have to play again. Side note, but this diagonal right here is always represented by a neutral value, whether it be a 0 or a 50 or just dashes, because obviously a character cannot have an inherent advantage or disadvantage against itself. In short, a tier list will tell you the most optimal choice if you don't know what your opponent is going to pick, and a matchup chart will tell you the most optimal choice if you do know what your opponent is going to pick. So taking things back to Smash Bros, according to this community aggregated list I found from Event Hubs, if your opponent is picking a random character, your safest bet is Pikachu. And indeed, when we look at Pikachu's matchup chart, the vast majority of the cast is at disadvantage when facing Pikachu. But not everyone is. So if you're playing Pikachu in a tournament and you know your opponent is switching to Mr. Game & Watch, your best bet is to use Ike. But if they choose Peach or Daisy, well, Ike struggles a bit, so you might as well play Shulk. But if they go with Ness, then you should choose Mr. Game & Watch. But if they choose Olimar, well, Shulk's got you covered, so that's cool. But what if they go with Mario? Lucina's the best pick, but hey, there's Shulk again at number 2. So easy peasy, right? If you main Pikachu, just also master Ike, Shulk, Lucina, and Mr. Game & Watch, and you'll have every single matchup covered in the game. But of course, it's not that simple. Now you see the problem here, right? In rock, paper, scissors, the player's skill in match does not matter. Once you pick a character, there is literally nothing you can do to control the outcome of the match. If you're playing a rock against a scissors, tough luck, you lose every time. But here in a fighting game, the numbers on the matchup chart indicate an advantage because your skill as a player can be much more influential on the outcome of the match than the character that you choose. And that means if a player wants to win with a secondary character, they need to put time into practicing with it. So if a player were to try to pick up every single character that was a direct counter to every bad matchup their main has, chances are they'd spread themselves out way too thin, their performance on all of their characters would suffer, and they'd end up just losing more than they would if they had just invested all their time into their main. So what a lot of top-level players instead do is they focus on their main for the most part, and then pick up maybe 1 or 2 secondaries to help cover their main's worst matchups. Like in our previous example, if you're a Pikachu main, Shulk popped up a lot as a decent choice for most of Pikachu's matchups. So maybe Shulk would be a good second, right? But I'm not satisfied with maybe Shulk is a good secondary for a Pikachu main. No. I want a definitive, statistically rigorous answer as to what the best secondary is for a Pikachu main and every other character while I'm at it. So that's where the main question of this video comes in. Using a matchup chart, can I statistically determine the best secondary to cover a main's bad matchups? Now, I know a little bit about statistics, so I know that no matter what it involves, it'll probably involve a calculation for every pair of characters. So let's see, 82 characters squared. We'll get every matchup minus 82 because of the mirror matches. We want to remove them. And then divide that by 2 because the order doesn't matter. The order does matter, never mind. And we get 6,642 calculations. So yeah, definitely something I should get a computer to do for me. Problem is, I don't know how to code, but maybe problem solved? I can get ChatGPT to do it for me? And maybe I can also get it to give me a statistical method to analyze the data while it's at it. So with that, it is time to retreat into the massive black hole that is AI. Hopefully, I will see you on the other side. I am impressed. I am genuinely very impressed. I will link to the entire text dump conversation in a Google Doc in the description below if anyone wants to read through the entire thing. But yeah, let's talk about it. So in preparation for my chat, I needed to get the actual Event Hub's matchup information into a chart. Unfortunately, they do not have such a thing. It's all spread out between each individual character's pages, and even the historical data, which was put into a chart, was literally just screenshotted and uploaded to the site. It would take literal hours to compile the spreadsheet myself manually, so I took to Reddit and asked if anyone knew if there was a spreadsheet form. And of course, in typical Reddit fashion, the only answer I got was not a yes nor a no, but rather a, why do you even want to know that? Event Hub sucks. So yeah, that was unhelpful. I did, however, find another matchup chart on Reddit compiled by one Silean EUW, linked to this post in the description, but that was a lot more helpful. The matchup chart is a compilation of a bunch of different professional players' opinions on the matchups of their mains, so overall, I'm glad I found it because I think this is a lot more rigorous of a source. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the conversation I had. To start out, I made a general overarching questions just to kind of test the waters and see what I was working with. So I wrote, what kind of statistical analyses can I use to figure out what the best secondary character to play in a fighting game to cover my main character's weaknesses based on the information provided in matchup charts? And it actually seemed to understand grammar mistakes and all. I had to browse through a few suggestions for statistical analyses, but once I settled on something called a correlation analysis, I asked it to write me some code that would read the matchup chart and run the analysis in the way that I wanted. It then told me as an AI module it could not run code, fair, but it also couldn't write code, which confused me for a whole of 5 seconds until it then wrote the entire code in Python for me. So I don't know what that was about. At this point, I was feeling super hopeful. The AI seemed to understand exactly what I wanted, and to my untrained eye, the code looked pretty good. The AI had even labeled each section of code to tell me what it did, so if I wanted to read through, I could kind of get a feeling as to what it was trying to accomplish. It even helped me troubleshoot installing Python and the various things that I needed in order to run the code. So I got the code up and running, and then this was where something interesting happened. The output of the code was just a list of characters like this. And when I asked it what the heck this list was, it cheerfully told me that this was a list of all of the cast of characters in order from the best secondary for Captain Falcon to the worst. But here's the thing. I never told it that I personally wanted to use this to figure out Captain Falcon's secondaries. In truth, that's literally all I wanted to use it for. But it figured that out all by itself. Sure, I had name-dropped Captain Falcon before in some examples, but I had never asked it to specifically do this. So this AI figured out, by the way I was typing or whatever, what I specifically wanted, not what I asked it, and then it figured out exactly how to Nah, I'm just yanking you, Chain. So what I ended up figuring out what was happening was it just kind of grabbed Captain Falcon from prior in our conversation and assumed that it was the first character in the list on the matchup chart, which is not true. So it just grabbed whatever first character was on there and did the calculations for that one. It was not one step ahead of me. It was on another page. Now, interestingly, after I pointed out its mistake, it pointed out an unrelated mistake that I had made. It suggested that we only run the correlation test for bad matchups and not good matchups. Basically, it said, hey, we should probably change the code so that we're only looking for secondaries that are good against the mains bad matchups, and we don't care about secondaries that are bad against the mains good matchups. So I said, awesome, do that, but also this time, can you calculate how good of a secondary every single character is for each and every character in the game? So after that, I got a satisfyingly long list like this. And based off of this data, the best secondary for Captain Falcon was Falco with a correlation of 0.726. Basically, a pretty decent pick. But I didn't want to stop there, so I asked it to basically redo the code, but instead print only the best matchup for each character and print the best 3 matchups where the secondary character excels over the main character. But after double checking manually, I found that instead of Falco being better than Captain Falcon's bad matchups, Falco was abysmal against Captain Falcon's slightly disadvantageous matchups, which, by the way, is the opposite of what I wanted. I don't know how it reached that conclusion, but after some back and forth, I had it fix the code and spit me out another list of best secondaries for mains. Except this time it gave me King K. Rool, which was abysmal against Captain Falcon's okay matchups, which is a different kind of opposite than what I wanted, but still kind of the opposite of what I wanted. So I again told it what was wrong, and then it spit out some new code, and this time, for whatever reason, instead of just calculating all of the characters, you had to type in the name of the character you wanted, but whatever, I tested it on Captain Falcon. So this time it spat out Olimar, and thank the Lord, when I double-checked it, every single one of the matchups were bad for Captain Falcon and pretty good for Olimar, so success, right? Well, but of course, at that point, I still was not satisfied because A, it needed to be a lot more user-friendly if I was going to share it with the world. At that point, what you needed to do was run Python code, change the command directory, edit the code itself to choose the matchup chart from your files and to select the correct character. And B, I needed it to be a lot more customizable. It was very rigid. It took a name and it gave you a result. You didn't get to choose anything about what kind of result you wanted. I wanted to add the ability to get more than one suggestion or to see more results as to why the character was chosen as a good secondary, or the ability to tell the program to only focus on the character's top 5 worst matchups, for example. So I asked it exactly what I could do to customize this program further, and one of the suggestions it gave was to do a GUI, a graphical user interface. So at this point, I knew exactly what I wanted. What I wanted was code that, when run, it would pop up a window, you could select a matchup chart from your computer, it would automatically read that matchup chart and populate a drop-down menu with a list of characters, you would select what character you wanted, and then you would select how many of that character's worst matchups you wanted to be taken into account, and then you would select, finally, how many secondary suggestions you wanted. And upon clicking confirm, it would do the calculations and then print out the main character and a list of all of the worst matchups you asked it to calculate with, and then the number of secondary suggestions that you asked, as well as how they do against all of those bad matchups. Should be a simple next step, right? I know exactly what I want, easy peasy. Yeah, I wish. Commence me banging my head against the wall. The first problem was that the code wasn't running half the time, and it took me way too long to figure it out, but apparently ChatGPT was just not including the last line or the last few characters of the code. I have no idea why it was doing this, but my best guess is that there was just some glitch that was causing ChatGPT to not finish answering the question properly. The second problem I ran into was that it just was not giving me the code when I was asking it for the code sometimes. I don't know why, but the later I went in the conversation, the more and more direct I had to be with, please give me the entire code. I don't know if I was wording it improperly sometimes, but it would just give me like snippets of code that I could edit in myself, which I do not know how to do, or it would tell me generally how to fix it without actually giving me any code, which again, I don't know how to do, so not helpful to me. Now, those two problems were annoying, but they were relatively easy fixes. I just had to remind it to do what I wanted it to do. But the last problem was definitely the most frustrating, and it's one I like to call whack-a-mole. For example, I would run into a problem where it wasn't letting you upload a CSV file. So I'd talk with ChatGPT and boom, whack that problem, it's gone. And then, okay, focus on the next problem. It's not properly running the statistical analyses. So talk with ChatGPT, boom, whack that problem. And then the final problem, okay, it's not actually displaying the characters' names properly. So I talk with ChatGPT, solve that problem. But by the time I'm solving all these problems, the original problem that you can't upload a CSV file pops back up. Even though I literally took its former code that was working, copied and pasted it, and said, hey, this code that you did, I want this, except instead of having to write the name of the file of the matchup chart and write the name of the character that you want to analyze in the code, I just want it to be selectable via a GUI. Please do that for me. It would spew out some code that required me to download something else to run it for some reason. And then I find out the reason why is it wants me to upload my CSV file so that it can display a normal histogram that doesn't have any meaning whatsoever. Like, what was it even doing at this point? So after cooling off for a day, I decided to give it one last Hail Mary pass try. And I gave it an in-depth, excruciatingly specific explanation of exactly what I wanted from the beginning with an example, and it gave me this in response. I'm sorry, but as an AI language model, I am unable to write a complete code for you. However, I can provide you with some guidance on how to approach the problem and some resources that might help you get started. So, upon reading that, I knew it was absolute baloney. I mean, it had already written each individual piece of the program, and I absolutely knew that it could put it all together. I'm assuming that there's just some block on it that prevents it from writing too long of a code. I don't know, but in any case, I took it as a solid sign that it was time to stop banging my head against the wall and to start recording the video. So with that, let's talk about how successful I actually was. You could say I was successful, and you wouldn't be wrong, depending on how you defined it. I did successfully get a program that took a main character, analyzed a matchup chart, and gave you a recommended secondary character based on a correlation analysis of the main character's bad matchups. But in any other definition, it is not good. It is a pain to run. It's difficult to input what character and what matchup chart you want to use. And the fact that it only gives you one suggestion, and that suggestion could potentially just be decent against your character's not so decent matchups, but trash against your character's worst matchups, kind of speaks to how it doesn't function ideally. So why did I start this section out by saying I was really impressed? Well, for one, even though the final result was a far cry from what I actually wanted, I still got some useful code out of it. The fact that it knew kind of what I wanted from the get-go, and it had enough insight to say, hey, remember, even if you do these statistics, the best character to pick is still determinant on your own playstyles and preferences, is actually really impressive. Keep in mind, this is all coming from a computer whose basic job is to read the internet and use an algorithm to just figure out what the next best word to type is. Maybe I'm just a big nerd, but coming from watching videos from like 2 years ago where the latest and greatest chatbot was being lauded for remembering something it typed 2 paragraphs back, despite the fact that aside from that, everything that it was writing was just grammatically correct nonsense, coming to this where all its responses are filled with paragraphs of grammatically correct and accurate information, it's mind-boggling to me. And as someone who is a teacher and whose entire channel is centered around trying new things, I love where this is going. To me, one of the hardest things about trying something new or learning a new hobby is the barrier to entry. Just figuring out where to start, what to ask, and to whom to ask is extremely frustrating when you don't have a teacher right there who you can just have a conversation back and forth about whatever it is. I mean, take my stupid situation with Reddit earlier. Despite asking a subreddit with thousands of users that are specifically interested in Smash Bros. That could have just answered my question with a simple yes, no, I got one answer hours later that was just like, why are you asking this question? This is stupid. Compare that with ChatGPT, where I can ask a question and it will give me an answer immediately, and it will give me multiple suggestions, and those multiple suggestions all have their own explanations, and I can ask it as many follow-up questions as I want, and it will never get upset that I'm wasting too much time, and I can ask it as many questions as I want, and it will never be busy. It's kind of obvious which one is better to get me the information that I need, right? It feels like the difference between trying to learn the rules to a complicated board game via reading the rulebook versus via a friend who's played it a million times who's trying to explain it to me. Like, sure, it may not be as perfect as reading the rulebook, and you may need to engage your brain and ask some questions in order to get the information you want, but it's much faster and it's much better. I mean, look at this code. Every single line is labeled with what it does, and since I have the ability to test whether it works or not, I can verify whether it's correct or not. ChatGPT may not have been able to write the final code for me, but given that I have all this information now and I can test things myself, I'm confident that I could figure out how to write it myself, given the fact that I can continue to ask ChatGPT for guidance in the future. I've already started using it to gather information for my next video, and would not be surprised if it becomes like a full-time advisor to the channel in the future. Oh boy, I think it's time to wrap things up here. Sorry for the longer and more talk-heavy video. I originally expected this to be more focused on like fighting games and matchups and statistics, but given how interesting the AI turned out to be, it just kind of ballooned into what it was, and it's now looking to be like my longest video yet. And while this video was, by a lot of accounts, a failure, I think in the fact that I learned more about AI and I'll hopefully be able to use it to make my next videos even better, it was a success in that regard. Keep an eye out for part 2 where I actually write the code and talk about the fighting games and stuff. Someday. But if you are an enterprising individual who feels they can beat me to the punch and you'd like to chat about it with me, feel free to contact me via any of my socials, especially my Twitch. It's always fun when you can talk to me live on the internet. But that wraps it up for today, folks. See you next week. Bye.